Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the AppSec Insiders Podcast. My name is Jared Mate, and I'm joined today with Farshad Abbasi, the founder of Forward Security. Say hi.
Hello.
And I'm also joined as ever by my trusty sidekick, Iman.
Hello.
Hello. Iman and I are senior application security consultants here at Forward Security. And for those of you who are new to the AppSec Insiders, this is a show where we discuss the latest trends, best practices, and current events in the world of application and cloud security. If you're an AppSec professional and you're looking for an opportunity to work with some of the best in the industry, or a developer with an interest in cybersecurity, be sure to check out our careers page at forwardsecurity.com/careers. We would greatly appreciate if you would subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to the show, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter/X or whatever at Forward Security. Links are in the show notes. Today, we're going to be talking about some IoT stuff. We're going to be talking about the Flipper Zero and some of the new attacks against the iPhone. But before we dig into that, there's a few upcoming events that we should talk about. One of them is that the third Thursday of every month in Vancouver is the OWASP Vancouver meetup. So that one is coming up next week. And of course, there's the monthly Ottawa and Toronto OWASP meetups. The next OWASP meetup in Toronto, which I think is either going to be in December, they might take December off, but if not, January, I will be giving a talk there. So come out and see me. Okay, so is there anything else that I should mention before we start? No, I think that's it. So a few days ago, I saw online and almost simultaneously Farshad messaged me about this new attack that was surfacing that was that you could use your Flipper Zero to cause an iPhone to start popping up to start trying to connect to nearby Apple TVs or nearby in quotation marks Apple TVs, speakers, headphones, all sorts of things that can be really annoying on your phone. And I remember being at the last DEF CON, and it was constantly happening to me that there was a little thing popping up and down saying join an Apple TV, and I saw people around me having the same issue. And I remember thinking something funny is going on, so I turned off Bluetooth while I was there. After I saw that, and then a paper came out. And it turns out, that in fact, there was a guy walking around with this antenna because he had discovered that you can just replay the requests from Apple TVs and HomePod speakers and things like that. And so somebody took that paper and implemented it into the Flipper Zero. So now you can just walk around and do it to people all day. Then somebody took that even further, and this is when it hit the news, was that there was some combination of that spam that would cause the iPhone to actually lock up. And I tested it on myself, and boy, does it work. You keep getting the notifications, so you lock your screen because you're like, I don't want to see these anymore. And then when you go to unlock it, it doesn't unlock. And you actually have to hard reset your phone. It just stays as a black screen. It's pretty powerful. And then they came out with the Android version of that. So now you can just, on your Flipper, you just download this app from the flipc.org website, and you can just have it playing in your pocket and just walk down the street. And if you walk and look behind you every so often, you see people shaking their phone, things like that. So Farshad, how did you first discover this?
I was just reading about it online, and it just came up in my newsfeed. I was looking for new articles to share for our weekly library share, and I came across this. But it was a reminder. These attacks aren't new. Bluetooth has been around for a long time. Some of these vulnerabilities have existed for a long time, but are brought to light the fact that now it's easier to do these kinds of attacks because devices like Flipper are available to the average consumer like you and I. If we were to do these types of things previously, the kind of devices we needed would not have been available. Mm-hmm. So this is going to open up a door to exploits and all these older protocols that have been immune from exploits because of security from off security, right? Like there were no devices that would help people leverage these exploits, but now there are. So it's going to be an interesting world going forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Previously you could have owned a Hack RF, which is pretty expensive, and was really, it's kind of seen for enthusiasts. I think I know that they sell it at DEF CON, and I know there's all sorts of people who buy it and probably don't end up using it because it just seems cool, but they want to have it. But even then, it's a bit more complicated to use. It has to pair with a laptop or some other device to function. And the Flipper, it's just a little, maybe it's not as complex. The radios aren't as powerful as a Hack RF, but it is extensible, I guess, if you wanted to have, But you don't need it. It's got everything you need for these types of attacks built in. So previously, lots of people have known that those little RFC tags that you use to get into buildings or get into your garage, are copyable, right? I think everybody's even non-tech people know it's probably not the most secure. But in order to copy them, you had to really try. You had to go and buy special hardware that would only do that. Now you can get a Flipper Zero. It does that and about a million other things, including Bluetooth attacks like this one for iPhone. And it's pretty discreet because it doesn't look nefarious. It kind of looks like a toy, and intentionally so. So yeah, I think it's a brand new age in that sense. I think it's very cool.
So Jared, the other devices, do they, the one that you were mentioning, does it support all the different radios? With I know with this Flipper, with the basic model, you can do RF and NFC and Bluetooth, and you can add the Wi-Fi capability. So then you can pretty much, attack any wireless protocol, most of them. Is that the same with the device that you were mentioning?
I think I am not an expert in wireless signals, but I know that it works with all radio frequencies. So I would imagine there's probably software you can download that targets the Bluetooth range.
Wow.
And I also don't know exactly how it works with. I'm not sure if it works with NFC, which the Flipper also works with. Because NFC, I think, while it is technically a radio frequency, it's two coils activating each other, so there's like more than just radio frequency going on. But certainly I would imagine for Bluetooth, it is capable of that, and certainly sub-gigahertz. Certain kinds of RFID. But the other thing that the Flipper has that Hack RF doesn't have is it has this very cool the I button, which you don't see very often. But I remember when I was a kid, I used to go to Laser Quest all the time, which was, if you're listening to the show and you don't know what that is, it's a laser tag place you go to. They give you a vest with sensors and lights on it, and you get a big old rubber gun that shoots a laser. And if you were a regular member there and you wanted to keep track of your scores, they gave you an I button that you could keep on your keychain, and you would touch to the top of your gun. And it kind of looks like one of those coin cell batteries, but there's actually a chip in there that stores a bit of data. So this has the ability to read and write to those as well. So, I haven't been back there. I think it's still open. I would love to go there and test that out. Sometimes you see it for apartment building lobbies, but it's rarely used. But it's still cool that it has that, and it has infrared. So I'm sure a lot of people, especially people who are in the hacker world or of that hacker mindset, have probably seen the TV Be Gone kits that they used to sell, probably still sell online, which are you remember those? You would solder them, or you could probably get prefabbed ones, but I used to buy the soldered kits, and then you would point it at a TV, and it would run through all the codes for every manufacturer, and it would turn off all the TVs in the area. Right. And then I remember, actually, this is sort of a side story, but I had a watch that did that. Anyways, long story short, this has infrared in it, and you can basically download apps that will do exactly that.
Actually, the thing is that IoT security is very interesting, and I don't know, should I share my screen right now or not? But there are tons of Google Docs around. And right now I'm seeing one of the cameras in an airport, and with one of the Google Docs, there are tons of cameras around the world, and they're not authorized. Like, you can just have the URL and just open the camera and see other people's like what they're doing, and there are a lot of issues with IoT security. People, they don't take it as serious as web security stuff. Like, and there are tons of Google Docs, And
and Shodan too. Yeah.
I'm gonna say Shodan. Yeah, you can find all the IoT devices that are open.
yeah, exactly. Shodan. That's the thing. But other than that, like we have like OWASP top 10 for IoT, and we can go over some of the top 10 items for sure. But in 20 minutes, we don't have that much time to cover all of them. And one of the issues that I've seen, like there are a lot of IoT devices with hard-coded passwords, and and those are like generic passwords. Those are not like random password for each device. And you can just like admin. You can just log into some people's wireless modems using those hard-coded credentials. And and that's it. That's other than that, Jared, do you have any question?
Yeah, I was wondering. So Farshad, you've been around the industry for a while. What are some general IoT issues that you've seen?
Well, currently we're seeing a rise in the number of IoT devices, and that's just accelerating. Everybody's buying a device, whether this for their home or for their office. So the biggest thing right now is the expanding attack surface. As you get more and more devices, you're expanding that attack surface. And I think they're saying that the number of active IoT endpoints in 2022 were around 14.3 billion. That was an increase of 18% over the previous year. So that's a fairly large number. And then, as we all know, IoT devices, they're not secure, right? Because they usually are very limited. They have small computational capacity, low power design. You can't put in a lot of security controls in them. So inherently, they end up being insecure. So you can imagine now you have all these devices, they're increasing at a rapid rate, and they're inherently can be insecure. And then the other challenge is companies, asset management is difficult. Even if the companies tried, most organizations, they don't have visibility into all of their IoT endpoints. So in fact, surveys showed that about 48% of devices, or 65,000 of them, are at risk because they're no longer detected by that organization's IT department. And then add to the fact that updating these IoT devices can be challenging because these things, vendors often don't even put out. Some vendors don't even put out updates for them. For example, there's security patches that vendors don't put out, and it's more difficult to update.
Yeah, new models come out and they just forget about the old models.
Exactly, right.
Sometimes they require hardware access. You have to actually walk up to the device and plug something in to update the firmware, and
exactly.
IT doesn't always have time for that, especially at in a big facility.
Exactly. And then some of the devices are, like I said, they're cheap devices. The manufacturer just makes them, you buy it for $50 and then you forget about it. They make a new model. Sometimes I can't even read the model number on these devices. I'm sure you bought these things. You're trying to read it on the front, on the back. There's no model, barely any manufacturer listed on these things, right? So you add the fact that it's challenging to update them. Add the fact that there's more and more of them every day. Add the fact that they're difficult. Most companies don't have a good handle on asset management when it comes to IoT. There's more. You add the fact that there's shadow IT. What is shadow IT? Is when employees just bring their own devices and IT department doesn't know about them, right? I've seen that in many places where I've worked. People just bring in their own Wi-Fi access point, fitness tracker, and all kinds of stuff, and they connect it to the corporate network. IT doesn't even know about them. Now these devices are in the corporate network, right? And then and then add all the insecurities. So together, this becomes a large problem for organizations to manage and deal with. So it's a problem.
And then not to mention, so on top of that, doing encryption in these small devices is usually pretty difficult. A lot of the time, especially if they're a couple years old. Nowadays, I mean, it's still not great. The landscape is still not great, but still it's a little bit better. But even as far back as 2 years ago, or as recently as 2 years ago, there are issues with, because the device is so small, it doesn't have the kind of power, or it needs to run on such low power. It doesn't have the kind of processing power that you would want out of out of a computer in order to be able to do proper encryption. So a lot of these devices, they can't do proper TLS, or they can't do proper encryption handshakes and things like that, because processing power is so limited. The device itself is physically small. Sometimes it's running on battery for whatever reason. So now you've just inherently, by the fact that the device is not secure, you brought it into an office, and now you've basically brought in an unsecure entry point into that network.
Jared, It's funny. A friend of mine, he was a UBC engineer, ended up, graduating, got a job at a company in Vancouver. They were building swipe card readers for credit cards, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm a guy in developer security. He's like, "Hey, Farshad, how do I? We're trying to, so it's a network swipe card reader." And I'm like, "Oh, what protocol are you using?" He's like, "Oh, TCP." I'm like, "Why are you not putting this on top of TLS?" You already answered it, Jared. The answer was don't have enough memory, can't implement that stack.
Yeah.
Making a credit card swipe reader that would send the credit card numbers over TCP. This company didn't care. And when you ask them, they were like, we don't have enough resources to fit it in, right? And they just would just put these things out there. So can you imagine how many of these devices have been put out there, right?
Yeah, it's it's a really good point. And then you even there's another problem where, so I've built some small devices. I have done some stuff with, I make like little toy things at home for fun projects. And one of the things that I've run into is it's an interesting problem to try to solve. When you have a device that is capable of encryption, let's say you've got a Raspberry Pi, for instance, where do you store those certificates and encryption keys, right? You have to store it on the device, but the device is so physically readily available. You have to find a way to sort of lock it away or make sure that nobody can ever physically come into contact with it. Or you have to find a way where the password gets entered some other way, like through an app on your phone. And now you've added a layer of complexity. So people are going to use default passwords. And it's like, there's almost no winning,
Do these have TPMs, Jared, the ones that you've seen? Because TPM would be one way to deal with that, but I don't know if any of them do.
So I don't know about the latest model of Raspberry Pi, but I do know that there are companies that make hardware like basically TPMs or HSMs that are like they call them like shields that you plug into your Raspberry Pi and will do the encryption on the device. But I haven't vetted them. I don't know. Can people? Obviously, it'd be much more difficult. You can't just plug it into USB and pull out the code, but maybe it's not impossible because you still have physical access to the device.
Right.
But I would like to suggest a solution, and maybe you can build upon this or tell me what you think. It's just what comes to mind. This is what I do at home. Anything that I think is an IoT device that I don't know, what kind of phone home capabilities it has or what it opens. Like for instance, I've got one of those Roombas. I put it all on a VNet that's not exposed to the internet. So I just have my little local VNet and all the devices go into there. And they can't talk to any of my computers or servers, or they don't, reach out to the internet, etc. Would that work for an office, do you think, to do something like that?
To have like a separate segment for those devices?
Yeah, a separate segment that has no internet access. So let's say you want to join your Fitbit or whatever so that you can Wi-Fi connect it to your computer. I guess, I mean, really, if you're coming to an office, there should just be a rule that you're not allowed to join unknown devices to a network. But
it's interesting, right? Because the idea is to segment. Segmentation is a good thing. And when I've built networks for companies in the past, the approach that I take is when I'm doing a network design, I look at the types of users in my network and the types of functions they'll have. So in this case, like one group of users would be users using insecure IoT devices, right? And then I would create subnets for each group. So like at one company, I had a subnet for my accounting department. We had a subnet for salespeople, subnet for guests and Wi-Fi. And then you could have a subnet for these IoT devices. I mean, segmenting, it becomes complicated, right? Subnetting is not the nicest and easiest thing to do, but that is one approach to do it. Or you could follow the zero trust model in more modern networks that have managed devices that support that, like Fortinet supports it. Then, it's not about just unrestricted, unfeathered network access control. Depending on the profile of the device, you'll be assigned an IP address and you'll be restricted in terms of where that IP address can go in your network. So that zero trust model, if it's implemented properly, would mitigate some of these issues. But in most companies, that's not implemented, especially in smaller business environments. Therefore, segregation could be a quick and dirty solution.
Yeah, I could see that. If I was a really sophisticated attacker, maybe I would see that somebody was buying some device, and I would intercept that device or try to sell it to them myself using, intercepting their network traffic or something at home on a device that I have access to. Sell them one of my devices or something. They receive it, they bring it into the office, and if I was your uncle, I've got a little
totally.
Point. Yeah. So what does OWASP have to say? What are some of the technical items that OWASP covers?
There are OWASP top 10, and there are 10 items that we can go over, but some of the interesting one of them is use of insecure or outdated components.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen in many cases that they don't update the OS kernel or the services that are running in the IoT device. And one of the reason might be that sometimes it's hard to push the updates for them. It's not that easy. And maybe it's a manual thing that they should go over some IoT devices to update them, or via the, they can do that via the control panel. But I've seen that, if, for example, you're using a service such as a SSH server, and you don't need that. Sometimes the other issue is that I've seen services that are enabled by default, and they shouldn't be enabled by default. Like, for example, like a GPS tracker might not need to expose the SSH server on the Linux box, actually. Yeah, that is something else that I've seen. And other than that, I remember one of my friends, he bought a GPS tracker, and later on he has shown that to me, and I found that there is a big IDOR issue. That is not authenticated, and you can just change the customer ID and see all the other trackers on the map, like all other people where they're going. And it's one of the craziest things about IoT devices. Like, it was over HTTP. There was no authentication or authorization, and it was one of the famous GPS tracker brands, actually.
Of course, yeah.
And I didn't report that, though. But in general, I believe we should be very careful when we are using IoT devices. What do you think about other technical aspects of the issues that we can find, or vulnerabilities that we can find in IoT devices?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough with IoT. I think in general, I would say, bringing a device into any network, you should be wary of, right? And you always have to sort of threat model what's the risk, what's the impact. If you're bringing something into your home, I would definitely keep a different network segment for your work stuff and your home stuff, and maybe if you have a NAS or something, keep that separate. Because you never know what's going to be in a device. But then again, you can't live paranoid your whole life. Yeah, sometimes you got to take a risk. And the only thing is that when it comes to a business, it's not your own property that you're risking at someone else's. So it's best to remember that when it comes to a business, just don't bring anything in that you haven't been requested to bring in. If it's a BYOD office, bring that one PC or that one laptop or whatever that they've asked you to bring in, or your phone, right? Any other device that you might want to bring in and might think is kind of cool or want to show your coworkers or whatever, it's just not worth the risk, because at the end of the day, it's not your risk that you're taking.
It's interesting too. So IoT is ripe with classic vulnerabilities, right? Because I guess it goes back to the beginning of our conversation with respect to that Flipper and the iOS Bluetooth attacks, right? Like Bluetooth vulnerabilities have been around for a while. Why were they not exploited? Because the tools were not available as readily available, right? And IoT, yeah, like I'm looking at the OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. A lot of them are like weak password, hard-coded password, insecure network services. The default password is not even set. Like all those things that are low-hanging fruit from application security 20 years ago. Why weren't these things addressed? Well, because not many people had IoT devices and not many people had access to hack them. Now that it's easier to hack and more people have them, we're seeing all those classic vulnerabilities just repeat themselves again.
And also because, sorry to interrupt, but also because the IoT devices tend to they are low-powered computers the way that computers used to be low-powered.
Exactly.
So for that reason, we see a lot of like printf string buffer overflows and things like that. Old hacks.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. What are the other notable ones, Iman and Jared, for IoT?
Sometimes they enable the debugging mode, and also they don't sign the firmware image, and that's the other issue that I've seen.
Also, having backdoors, or default passwords or support passwords. So, if you are able to dump the firmware of one of those, let's say, and I'm not calling out, actually, I was going to say a company name, but I should. Let's say you buy a light bulb that's an IoT light bulb, and you pull the firmware off of it, and you search it for strings, and you find that there's a hard-coded password. Well, that means that everybody who uses that light bulb has the same password in it. So now you can basically war drive, go around trying to connect to these light bulbs with this password, and all of a sudden you're in somebody's network or able to control the lights in their house, right? And that's just the lights.
And one more interesting thing is that it was last year we were at B-Sides Calgary, I and Jared. We participated in one of the CTFs for IoT security, and we won the first place. And it was like there were like a few items. One of them I rarely, my memories are very vague right now, but I know that we won. But for example, one of them was the speaker, and we were able to take control of an IoT speaker, and that's the thing that we won.
Yeah, this was the badge that we got. I don't know how clear that is, but from the IoT Village, very cool people. Shout out to these guys, ISC and the Loudmouth security team.
B-Sides Calgary, and it's happening, I think, tomorrow. Actually, it's this week, and you guys killed it with that CTF. That's right, I remember that.
Yeah, that was right. It was a lot of it was there were routers, there were speakers. It was. I think this was last year. So
played my favorite song on that speaker.
That's right. Yeah, it was fun. It was cool. It's also the one that I really love participating in when I go to DEF CON. Same guys. I just love it. It's just IoT to me is so fun. It's just like it's almost like time traveling. You've got all the knowledge of today's vulnerabilities, and they all have the old vulnerabilities in them.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because although these devices, in many cases they do use proprietary protocols, but many of the modern IoT devices also have regular web interfaces, because even within the OT networks, right? Like, let's just quickly talk about it. Like, what is OT, right? OT is the operational technology. IT is your information technology. That's where your Windows machines and your office people work. And then OT is your operational technology. It's still a network. There are some proprietary protocols, but a lot of these OT networks are now starting to run on top of IP addresses, right? Previously, there were proprietary protocols that ran into OT environments, but more and more we're seeing IT-based devices, and at the minimum, they'll have a web interface to configure those devices, right? So they may actually use the proprietary protocol to control the factory or the environment, the industrial environment. But when in terms of the control panel, oftentimes they'll use a web interface, and that's where you start to see all of these classic web vulnerabilities. So although it's an IoT device, a lot of the web vulnerabilities translate or extend, over very nicely, for the lack of a better word. So,
big time.
That's big time. Great. Awesome. I believe we want to conclude this episode of our AppSec Insiders podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed learning about all the stuff that are related to IoT security. Remember to tune in next time as we delve deeper into the world of application and cloud security and explore new ways to protect our digital asset. Also, I want to mention that we are in Vancouver, I and Farshad, and Jared is in Toronto. But I know in Vancouver, we have OWASP Vancouver meetups every third Thursday of every month. We have that. Please come and join us there. Also, we appreciate your support and engagement. And if you have any topics in your mind, please don't hesitate, email us. And our email is appsecinsiders@forwardsecurity.com. Our Twitter handle is FWD_SEC. Or feel free to follow Forward Security on LinkedIn for the latest in the application security news and other opportunities. Also, please consider subscribing to our podcast, and have a good one.